Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, Divine Friend Swami Kriyananda, we open our hearts, we open our minds, we offer our lives in devotion and service. Make us instruments of your presence, that everything we do will move us closer to self-realization and will be an uplifting influence on all whom we meet. Om. Peace. Amen. You know, the prayer that everything we do move us closer to self-realization is, in a sense, superfluous, because everything we do will move us closer to self-realization. That's just the way it is. But of course the prayer is to be guided to make the right choices that will cause us not to waste a lot of time or cause undue suffering for ourselves and for others. And also, the question is, why do we pray when God knows everything? We pray to clarify our own intentions, because He's not confused, but we are. And so when we begin, you sometimes find when you try to explain something to someone else, especially someone else, with a capital S, someone else, and there's clarity in their consciousness, then all of a sudden what you're thinking falls into line, because there's a vibratory reality to people of clarity, of wisdom. They have a vibratory reality. They don't necessarily have to say anything. I was very fortunate in the early years of my spiritual life not only to have Jyotish and Seva and Ananta and Prakash, many of the people who are now leaders of Ananda Devi, and Swami Kriyananda, of course, but it was possible for me to present my ideas to them. Many of my ideas were daft, and sometimes they would correct me verbally, and sometimes they would correct me merely by sitting there. And the contrast between my vibration and their vibration, mine of confusion and delusion and theirs of wisdom, allowed me to attune myself. I'm only a mediocre singer, but I can sing in a choir if somebody is close to me who's stronger than I am, because I can tell when I'm off, which, as I understand, is a step above not being able to tell when you're off. So if I can hear the right note, I can match it. But if I'm all by myself, especially if I'm hearing an alternate note, I am not at all reliable. So that's how we are spiritually. That's why we have a guru, because the guru is always pulsing with the right vibration, and we feel ourselves either in harmony with that or slightly out of harmony. And that learning to recognize the slightly out of harmony is really the whole of the spiritual path, and not so simple. Swami Kriyananda tells very interesting stories. I'll just bring one here, that even there was a point when he was in India, and that would have been 1958 is when he went, his first earlier trip. Might have actually been a later trip now that I think about it, but I can't recall right at the moment. But it was anyway. He was there and he met an advanced sadhu of our line of teaching, not a disciple of Master, but a disciple through Lahiri Mahashaya or Sri Yukteswar, which is what Swami would call Lahiri's Kriya Yoga line, because there's more than just Paramhansa Yogananda's branch of Lahiri's Kriya Yoga line. This is somewhat detailed for those of you who aren't involved as much, but in any case, that sadhu offered to initiate Swamiji in higher levels of the Kriya that Swami had never received directly from Master. And Swami thought about it, meditated on it for a while, and felt, well, if Master had lived longer and I had been able to get deeper, these things might have been taught to me. So he accepted it, and it wasn't just a teaching, it was also an initiation. So I took an initiation from this man in these techniques. And Swami said, and then he practiced them, and then Swami said, then nothing felt right for the next 6 months. Swami just said he just felt that there was something completely off with him. And then finally, at the end of 6 months, he realized that just that much he'd moved out of attunement with Yogananda. And of course, there was nothing wrong with the sadhu in his initiation, but Swamiji had felt that something was lacking in what my guru gave me, and I have to go to someone else and learn something else. And so he said he completely repudiated the initiation, stopped practicing the techniques, and immediately he felt in alignment again. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about the details of what happened to Swamiji. That's a whole different discussion. I'm talking about the fact that it happened to him, which is to say that we just keep sincerely doing our best. I read a little letter that Master sent to one of the disciples, or to all the disciples perhaps, and he said really simply, it doesn't matter how often you fall, I will pick you up again. So it doesn't matter how many times we sing the wrong note, as long as we're listening and we realize, and then we make an effort to come back. So that's about attunement, which is everything. Today I actually wanted to talk about death. And death to me is a beautiful subject, not a morbid one, but it's also really the essence of what March 2020 we're all dealing with right now. I don't read the newspapers, and I don't follow the news every day. I, like many others, use my computer, and my computer is a source of my connection to the world. And there's a few commentators or late-night comedians that I find are sources for me to find out as much as I need to know about what's going on in the world. So every so often I'll go to YouTube and I'll just scroll down and see what's at the top of the list and what headlines look interesting to me. And I've been doing this method for many years, and it seems to keep me as in touch as I need to be, and then I can always follow through if I need to. I'm not a forest sadhu. I'm in contact with many, many people, and I need to have some idea of what's happening in the world. Otherwise, I could turn my back on it completely, but it's not responsible for me to do so. And yesterday, when I was looking at some national news commentator whose name I don't even know, I was really impressed by how often he talked about people dying and about death. It was a very strong, straightforward. There's a lot of controversy between different levels of government right now about what the right action is and what the consequences of those actions will be, and so on and so on. So this commentator was trying to make very clear that the stakes now are death, which usually the stakes are not death. Usually the stakes are inconvenience, or egoic defeat, or a sense that somebody's following the wrong policies, or so-and-so is a scum or an illegal person doing something illegal. But what we're talking about now is death. And it was very impressive how clearly and forcefully he just said that word. And then I read someone else's extended comment on that, and the comment was simply, we're going to see a lot more people die than we're used to seeing. And I also thought that was a good way of putting it. It's not that people don't die, and it's not that we don't know that people die, but we tend not to die in big clusters. And what we're looking at now is the possibility of everybody knowing somebody, or everybody knowing a lot of somebodies who have exited from the planet. Now, I think it's very interesting. If we go to Master and we think about why this crisis has come to us at all, and why this crisis may precipitate a whole bunch of others, and why we may say that life was never the same for 50 years after this, is because Master said a correction is needed. A correction is needed not to punish people, but to open the doorway to true happiness, because we are singing the wrong note. And even if we can't tell yet what the dissonance is, our soul knows that we're in dissonance. The earth knows that we're in dissonance. The climate knows that we're in dissonance. The icebergs know that we're in dissonance. But above all, we know that we're in dissonance because we're anxious. We're just generalized anxiety. And, having to stop and stay home leaves us alone with our own minds on a level that we're not accustomed to being, and unable to vent our restlessness with physical activity, at least not with the usual physical activities, so the internal dissonance begins to show up. And Master said, things will be very different, but people will be much happier. Now, let me, wait just a second, I'm losing my thought. Let me find it. I keep wanting to touch my face, which I'm not supposed to do. Okay. Just a second here. Oh, yes. But the primary dissonance that society, many societies, and certainly America is living with, is that we no longer remember that we're part of a greater reality. We have begun to think that the ego is in charge. And I band together with other egos that feel like me, and we fight against those egos who have banded together who don't feel like me, and we vote against each other, and we campaign against each other, and we rail and criticize each other. But we don't try to attune to a greater reality because we've forgotten we're part of one. And we've come to a completely materialistic definition of life. So when something like this, which is just completely outside the control of the ego, comes, it can push us in a number of directions, but one of the directions it can push us is into what in our festival of light, it pushes us from the first stage of delusion that the soul enters is the revolt. I'm not going to pay attention to traditions of a lifetime or saints or masters or scriptures or anything. I know what's right. This feels good. I want it. And so for a long time, we just keep testing that theory. And in the Festival of Light, we say that even though repeatedly the little bird lost all it had, it kept insisting that I know what's right. But after a while, the dissonance begins to wear on us, whether that's incarnations or what it is. And some of us who came to yoga, to self-realization early in our lives, many lifetimes where the dissonance had really worn us out and caused us to move to the next stage, which is called the quest, where we are no longer imposing upon the world our ideas of what's correct, but now we're genuinely and sincerely asking, what is going on? And I put it like this, instead of saying, God, why are you doing this to me? We say, God, why are you doing this to me? And that leads us to a greater state of understanding, which is that we are part of a greater reality. Now, that should be obvious. And one of the ways that we can tell we're part of a greater reality is that many aspects of this world are outside of our control. Death being really the biggest one. Death is the mystery that is inevitable, that we all pretend is not going to happen, that we're shocked and surprised when it does happen. Now, what's also happening in this rising age of Dwapara, because of God's plan, which is somewhat manifested by advances in medical condition and advances in communication, and then gradually advances in the willingness of people to speak up, is that we have all these death and return experiences now, in which people are having the experience of leaving their body, and suddenly realize that that experience is completely different than what many people thought it was. I live in Silicon Valley, and Apple Computer is very big here, and Steve Jobs and his family, they have their home. He had his home just a couple of miles from here. So he's a character that I know really well. And it was reported all over the world, as many of you may have read also, that when he died, which was a few years ago, at a surprisingly young age, of pancreatic cancer, the last words he said as he was leaving his body was, wow, oh, wow, just like that. Now, he didn't come back to tell us, but far from a cry of terror, it was a cry of surprised joy. And this is what every person who goes and comes back tells us. But even more profoundly, when they come back, they tell us, look, we are part of something so much bigger than we know. And this moving in and out of the body, far from being something to fear and to dread, is just a natural and a beautiful part of the story. You know, we need to grow. And often to grow, we need to change. We tend to think that we want things to be fixed, that we get them, you know, that this much of joy I'm going to have because I'm afraid that it'll get worse instead of better. So I'm going to cling to what I have and be very upset when I lose it, or think I'm going to lose it. But now we're in this position where objective reality is bringing the specter of death, invisible, you know, difficult to see it coming, and not certain what we're going to do about it. Conditions that can terminate our residency in the physical body. And do we panic? Now, being sensible is one thing. The Master said to have a physical body is a great blessing. I spoke about this in an earlier broadcast, because within the physical body it is possible to perceive infinity. The nervous system of the physical body is a great gift because it has the refined capacity for us to realize God within it. So to have attained the level of having a physical body, it's a great responsibility to use that spiritually to the maximum. But that is not an ego decision. What it is to use the physical body spiritually to the maximum is not a decision we ourselves can make. We can make decisions as to how we're going to act, to be responsible in the stewardship of that body, and responsible as we are in this time for helping to protect the physical bodies of others. But when this incarnation is done, when we have reached the end of our spiritual capacity to learn, our capacity to learn spiritually, we are part of a greater reality. And that last breath, once that last breath is taken, there just won't be another one, no matter how much we want it. And now here's what I want to say. For the person who dies, the way Swami Kriyananda put it to me, and I remember he was pleading with me the way he said it, pleading with me in the sense of he really wanted me to understand. Nothing happens when you die, he said. Oh, he said, you get out of your physical body, and if you've been physically suffering, that's a great relief, because you don't have physical pain in your astral body, in your energy body, but your consciousness and you are just the same. It's like you take off an overcoat. You go from one room to another. You fly, as we used to, a few hours and end up no longer in America. Now you're in Belize. Now you're in England. Now you're in Russia. But you're still there. And this is just how Swami put it. Now, that's for the person who dies. The soul knows that this is an appropriate thing to happen. We don't die by accident. We may die suddenly and didn't see it coming with our conscious mind. But death is death is part of the greater reality. So other people and factors, I want to put it this way, can participate in our karma, but they don't create our karma. There's a huge difference, you understand? Someone may betray you and break your heart, and you feel really unhappy. This person caused me all this unhappiness. They did participate in a karmic inevitability for you. Now, I've given 2 broadcasts on karma, so I'm not going to explain that more. You can go back and look for them. But that would never have happened to you if it wasn't necessary for your spiritual growth. So they participated in it, but they didn't cause it. So even the virus can participate in giving us a way to get out of our bodies if we need to get out of our bodies now. It can be the apparent cause, but that virus would never have caused us to exit our body if it wasn't already time for us to exit our body. If the doctors have to triage at the hospital, which they do regularly all the time anyway, if medical facilities become limited, they're going to have to make decisions about those who would probably die anyway, versus those who have a chance of being saved. So the doctor will participate in your karma, but he won't cause it. Everything will have been set up for that reason. Now, for this reason, death itself is nothing to fear. I'll shorten this story because I don't have a lot of time, but when there was the huge Beyond War movement, which took place in California a few years ago, and they put an initiative on the ballot trying to ban nuclear weapons. And some of those representatives came to Swamiji and wanted to persuade him for Ananda to put their energy behind their effort. I mean, it was a very noble effort, educated people a lot, and was a good thing to do, even though it didn't achieve its objective. It moved its objective forward, which was to enlighten people as to the folly of war, which is a growing Dwapara Yuga realization. So they gave a very fine presentation to Swami, very well done, all about the effect of a nuclear blast. If such and such a megaton, or however they measure a nuclear bomb, lands on the city of Chicago, how many thousands of people will be vaporized, how many people will be turned to ash, how many people will die of radiation afterwards. I mean, it went on and on. It was horrifying. Very, very tastefully, very effectively done, and very well done, but horrifying. Swami listened attentively, and then afterwards he said, first he commended them on the sincerity of their effort, their good intentions, and the excellence of their presentation. But then he said, when peace is your objective, fear is not the right method. Because fear is not peace. And peace is a vibration of consciousness. And if you try to create peace with fear, what you're actually creating is fear. And then you have fearful egos fighting against other fearful egos. And there you are, you're off to the races again. Now, that was a very interesting comment. Then Swami said, he said, in 100 years from now, almost no one on this planet is still going to be living on it. We're all going to be dead. He said, and Swami's very unsentimental, if we all dribble off a few at a time over the next century or exit to the astral world en masse, he said, the instant you're out of your body, it doesn't matter at all. You see, this is the perspective from this side. Now, that's the kind of thing Swami can say, because he really can say it. He means it. Because nothing happens when you die, and others may participate in your karma, but they don't cause it. We are part of a greater reality. This is the challenge of faith we're facing. But here is the difference. Grief is different than death. Death itself may not in itself be any kind of a tragedy, even for the person who dies. Even if it's a child who appears not to have had the benefit of their incarnation was done, or else they wouldn't leave. For whatever the karmic reasons are, 6 months, 2 years, 10 years, just may have been all that they were allotted. But the grief of those who are left behind, that is where the real challenge is going to come. And in another context also, I believe, well, speaking about cataclysm, Swami says the challenge will be for those who are left behind. And that's a little bit of what I talked about yesterday when I talked about suffering, about we must come to an understanding within ourselves of the power and presence of God within us. And it's a little late to be starting, but we might as well start now. Swamiji's advice to me once when I presented him with a very difficult conundrum about how to know God's will, he said, you have to practice when it's easier. So right now, when we are all compelled to just completely change the way we function in this world, now is the time to go inward, to try to feel the presence of God, to not merely dull our consciousness with entertainment, but also use this time to explore deeper levels of reality. Now is the time to learn yoga. Now is the time to meditate. Now is the time to familiarize yourself with higher teachings, philosophical or spiritual or religious, whatever it is that may appeal to you, to find music that actually lifts and liberates your consciousness, to do everything you can to practice being in tune with a higher reality, so that if we not only have to face death, which it's better if you're tuned in before that comes to you, but if we also have to have grief, we will have some place to turn. And all the saints and all the masters, and even a little tiny person like me, I have realized that I'm not alone. That's quite a statement, because I'm often alone. I'm often without physical company. But I am part of a greater reality. Now, I've been practicing this for 50 years. But even now, here I'll quote for you. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, even a little practice of this inward religion will save you from dire fears and colossal sufferings. So now is the time for a lot or a little, but begin the exploration with all this time on our hands. Let's try to both intuit and also explore. What is the wisdom of the ages about the nature of reality? And what is the real purpose of suffering? And why would God make a creation that includes death? In the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, in the commentary on that, Swamiji wrote, and unfortunately I can't quote it perfectly, but this is the sense of it. Let's see. The one who made us also created death as the end of our incarnation. The one who made us surely loves us. So therefore, the fact that he created death as the end of this incarnation must also be an expression of that love. Now, I don't expect you to take that as a self-evident dogma, but it's the thoughts that we need to be questing after right now. Because the only antidote for grief is not to say, oh, I wish my mother hadn't died, I wish my child had not died, I wish my friend had not died, I'm alone now in the world with no one to talk to, no one to take care of me. Grief is real. But we need to be able to ask ourselves, what good thing is God trying to give me through this grief? And we need to learn that not only for ourselves, but so that we can comfort our brothers and sisters. Master's specific comment, and this was just like 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences right after each other. The solution to hard times is to serve others. Because as soon as we start giving, not only do our thoughts turn away from how do I feel into how can I make someone else feel better, but as soon as we start giving, we open ourselves to be an instrument of higher consciousness. And what Master says is, the instrument is blessed by that which passes through it. So as soon as we start giving love and comfort to others, it's a miracle. We suddenly become love and comfort, and all of our own suffering in exact proportion is surrendered to God and turned at least into calm acceptance and eventually into joy. God bless you.